Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, and back with me as ever we have Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello, Fraser.
Coming up on today's show, we'll be talking about the coronation of King Charles, the downfall of Bud Light, and George Osborne's mad and miserable plan to ban smoking. So the eyes of the world this weekend will be on the coronation of King Charles in London. Tom, for such a big occasion such as this, it does feel as if the mood is a little bit damp. There hasn't been that much excitement or anticipation. That's the sense I'm getting, at least.
I think that's right. I mean, we might be made to eat our words when suddenly you have a huge coronation that everyone's very happy about and so on. But it does feel going into it that it is very damp. I mean, if you look at the polls, for instance, the support and the popularity that both the monarchy and Charles himself enjoyed in the wake of the Queen's funeral and all of the national mourning and so on, it's kind of dipped back down to where it was previously. I think there's a general sense that whilst the monarchy still commands significant support, it's around 63% of the public, I think, at this point, it's support that is wide but not necessarily deep.
Yeah.
There is a dampness to it, and I think you see that expressed in this coronation. I think what monarchists are going to have to sort of reckon with, if they want to, is the fact that whilst many of them felt that they were kind of riding high, particularly in the wake of the Queen's death, because it kind of reasserted the institution, its traditions, its power, and so on, that a lot of the monarchy's popularity in recent years rested on the popularity of the Queen herself. And now, with Charles, someone who's been a much more controversial figure, he's about, I think, the fourth or fifth most popular royal is it currently. You see why the dampness is there. So I don't think that monarchism is sort of riding high in any meaningful sense, and I think the dampness of this coronation shows that. On the other hand, the monarchy is blessed with very naff opponents, and whilst I'm Republican Spike's a Republican publication, we've for many years been pointing out just how naff that opposition is, which is probably something we should get into. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's interesting as if you're right to say that it feels like the power of the monarchy is waning, but not because it's being battered by, a strong Republican democratic force. It's almost a little bit by default. You see, particularly among young people, falling away from the monarchy quite quickly. But we know that's not a generation that has democratic ideals at its heart. You think about their attitudes to something like Brexit, where they're very much opposed. They don't see the value in this democratic project. Often a lot of polling says that young people are not on board with free speech as much as the older generation. So again, is it actually liberal and what we would call progressive values, progressive democratic values that are eating away at the monarchy, or is it something else? Because one of the big attacks, people may have seen the recent Panorama documentary on the monarchy, and one of the reasons they seem to cite is to do with race. There's this sense that the monarchy is a racist institution, a hangover from empire. Seems slightly unjustified. A lot of it to do with Meghan Markle, who, a questionable figure to say the least. Or whether it's the row with Lady Hussey and things like that. People may remember the Queen's lady-in-waiting basically being unceremoniously dumped by the monarchy after she asked a black charity worker, "Where are you really from?" These kinds of rows seem to have taken a much larger, a lot of the criticism of the monarchy is done through the spectre of empire, through the spectre of race, rather than through the spectre of democracy.
No, I think that's right. It's kind of become caught in the crossfire of like the culture war, essentially, and we've seen that in recent months. I think it's also been interesting that the royal family themselves have been very defensive in the face of all of this. Obviously, you had the recent statements, as you've gestured to, of Charles giving the thumbs up to this investigation into the slave-owning past of the royal family. As James Hartfield said on Spike, there could be a very short investigation. This stuff is common knowledge, really. But nevertheless, it shows the direction of travel. You've had William and Charles, I think, kind of make apologetic statements in relation to colonial past and so on. The Lady Hussey thing I thought was fascinating because they did essentially throw her under the bus. A much more self-confident monarchy could have said, of course she's not racist. What are you talking about? Everyone loves her. Even Harry and Meghan made a point of saying how much they liked Lady Hussey, which says something. And yet they were still very much on the defensive, But in a sense, even though it is coming under challenge, or at least certain people who are opposed to the monarchy spy an opportunity at the moment, I think the trouble that you have is that the two wings of republicanism, if you like, such as they exist in society at all these days, are both kind of as bad as each other and both quite negative and anti-democratic. You kind of have the sort of republic set, the sort of people who would be out there on the Mall wearing one of those fetching yellow "Not My King" T-shirts, who spent many years banging on about how much the monarchy costs, the sort of argument that has never convinced anyone one way or the other, I don't think.
Too many parades.
Too many parades,
such
too much
a miserable
ceremony. Yeah, no, they play into the caricature of our side of this argument, which is, we're like Puritans who would happily ban Christmas again, sort of thing. They don't help on that front. Also, these days, I hate to say it, but scratch a Republican, you tend to find a Remainer. So these people don't really believe in the public very much. They have a tendency to sneer towards them. They don't really believe in democracy, generally speaking. Then you have this younger wing. There's this group which is reportedly sprung up called No More Royals. There was one member of it, a non-binary individual, as it turns out, who was speaking to the press, talking about how with the radical, controversial, largely queer-backed, apparently, campaign group led by students, who seem to less object to the British monarchy as they do object to Britain in general. They kind of see it as a sort of racist construct and so on. So both sides are kind of bad as each other. I think the thing that they share is not really a particular belief in democracy. They object to the monarchy on a range of aesthetic and kind of cultural grounds, but that kind of belief in the sovereignty of ordinary people, that's the power that MPs should wield in Parliament. It's on our behalf, not on the Crown's behalf. These arguments are sort of not really made, certainly amongst that younger cohort, as you say. And
we should talk a little bit about King Charles and his beliefs, particularly. One thing he's very known for is his obsession with environmentalism. So it's interesting that there could even be protests this weekend from environmental groups when you think, he's your biggest champion, ironically enough. He drives an Aston Martin that's powered by cheese curds and old wine, such as his commitment to the green cause.
Smell that thing coming, I'm sure.
Yeah. He used to talk about how he would speak to plants and they'd speak back to him. A lot of people, strangely, are saying that, he is this kind of progressive pioneer. He saw climate change before we all did, when really it's just he's a bit batty, I guess. There's always been this kind of reactionary element to environmentalism. This always has an association with the aristocracy. People who feel themselves to be custodians of the land, essentially. And that is expressed in a kind of green sense here.
No, I think that's right. I think actually people who have become more irritated by Charles's sort of environmental statements and, really getting stuck in, basically kind of presiding over COP and so on.
Yeah.
And people on the right or the kind of monarchist set getting irritated with that because it's a sort of meddling in politics and so on. Not only has he held these views for a very long time, but Charles is a very useful reminder of, as you say, the kind of history of environmental and ecological sort of activism and thought, which is entrenched in kind of aristocratic reactionary politics, really.
Yeah.
And he's a kind of a throwback to that, essentially. The fact that he happens now to agree with Greta Thunberg, it does not make him a kind of a wokester in any sort of meaningful sense, at least on that score. Tim Black's writing the long read on Charles this week and really lifting the lid on the fact that people knew that Charles was strange. He's actually a lot stranger than I think a lot of people realise, into a lot of these very kind of essentially anti-enlightenment, anti-modernity ideas. He's dabbled with capital T traditionalism, this kind of strange mystic ideology, which is a fair few adherents on the kind of reactionary right, as well as now in the palace. So he's a very strange individual. What's interesting is that nevertheless you still have people, particularly environmental groups, who are getting quite excited because they had a king on their side. But if anything, again, he's going to demonstrate to you what a top-down, elitist, aristocratic ideology environmentalism is. Charles is a nice reminder of that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, is it fair to say for Charles, anything after the 1500s probably is where it all gone wrong? It's all gone wrong.
Sort of coincided with people of his bloodline having a much easier time of it as well. So maybe that's got something to do with it. But it's interesting as well because just to go back to the young people point, because I think it's worth saying that if you look at particularly the Ashcroft polls, which came out recently, which looked at the 18 to 24-year-old age group, or it looked at all the age groups, but it pointed out that the biggest chunk of that is don't know. So more think that there shouldn't be a monarchy than think there should be, but the biggest chunk is don't know. It's also worth remembering that YouGov pointed this out, that 10 years ago it was something like 72% of that age group supported the monarchy. So it's a very recent phenomenon. I think speaks to the fact that whilst that generation in particular has been inculcated into certain values which tend to make them great up against the monarchy. So many of the stuff that we've already touched on, it's not as kind of firm as it would be seen to make out. And it's also a very unprincipled naff, again, republicanism that just says, oh, there's this one age cohort that don't like it, so give it a few years and we're golden. That's a ridiculous way to approach it.
We had the same argument, similar kind of arguments put forward around Brexit, just wait till the old people die off and then it'll all be fine. But it is interesting thinking about that cohort, because the monarchy has, Charles is not fully woke or anything like that. That would be silly to say. But the monarchy has tried to embrace elite identitarian values. There's no question about that. I mean, Charles, in his own way, in his emphasis on multiculturalism, he sounds a bit like your local council when he talks about communities of communities. He could be writing a leaflet for a municipal board or something. He wants to put all faiths, and he uses the words diversity all the time, to show his commitment to this kind of multiculturalist outlook. And then, of course, you have the younger royals like Harry and Meghan, and even to a certain extent William. William gets off the hook a lot. People seem to think he's sensible. He clearly isn't. So the monarchy has even tried. It's interesting that even when the monarchy has really actually tried to embrace those kind of values, the values we associate with young people, the values we associate with the cultural elites, it's probably still not winning them over.
No, and I think the other thing is that, and William is a good example of this, is the embrace of therapy culture. Yeah. Essentially, because when Harry and William first kind of got involved in sort of political campaigning and so on, it was that Heads Together campaign, if anyone remembers that. Prince William having this Zoom call with Lady Gaga, talking about their various troubles and so on, and really playing into that idea that the royals needed to engage in a level of sort of soul bearing, that this is how you bring people closer to the monarchy. And whilst I'm not really in the business of giving the royal family advice, I think the opposite is really true. I mean, this Walter Bagehot's famous line about you don't want to let daylight in on the magic. And I think that kind of tendency to want to bear all is, if anything, in the longer term, going to undercut that sense of mystique, that sense of being above the fray, that the monarchy, even under the Queen, a moderniser in many respects, would still maintain that kind of level of distance and pomp and ceremony. Yeah. And so on. And it just, not only anything else, it just sort of rubs people up the wrong way. In Harry and Meghan, you've got a whole other level of soul bearing, of course. Just throwing open the curtains with your penis out, essentially, let alone letting the daylight in on the magic. So, but
400 pages of Freudian nightmare.
But they are, I think, in some ways, as you suggest, Harry and Meghan have become a useful foil to say there's these sensible younger royals over here and there's these lunatics over here. But I think it's a question of degree rather than kind, really, when you're talking about them.
So, I mean, we've talked about the crapness of the Republican movement as it stands. I mean, what would you say, Tom, is the case for getting rid of the royals? The good case, the democratic case?
Well, I think that's the thing. The royal family, the monarchy, is an outrage to democracy, to equality, to reason even. I mean, I think the fact that, again, we've had such a popular and it's hard-working and seemed to be pretty on it monarch for so long in the form of Queen Elizabeth II, we're kind of forgetting the fact that just because Charles is her son, the idea that he's going to be as good, as qualified, as liked, as able to cohere large groups of people is obviously ridiculous. It's a point that Thomas Paine always made. You're as likely to get an ass as a lion, and I dare say we know which one Charles is going to turn out to be. And you have to believe in the public. I mean, the clue's in the name with republicanism. I think the problem is that so many people have forgotten all of that. And I think for the people who are, as we've suggested, sort of just waiting around playing the demographic game, hoping that the monarchy will just collapse under the weight of scandal or all of these woke young people coming through and growing up and deciding to agitate and vote it out. I think you really also need to be careful what you wish for, because if something like the monarchy were to just sort of retreat, disappear, collapse and so on, you need to replace it with something. Yeah. What would it be? Technocracy? Identity politics? Those are seemingly the only two games in town that you have these days. So it makes it all the more important that anyone who is interested in properly pushing and furthering and deepening democracy in this country to get rid of the royal family, to make sure that, as I say, that popular sovereignty is at the heart of power in this country. You need to actually reacquaint yourself with those arguments. I think the problem is all of these different naff Republicans we've been talking about, they want a king of some sort, they just don't want this kind. Yeah. They want someone to rule it over us, whether it's a sort of identitarian or a technocrat. They just object to the monarchy on basically aesthetic grounds. So that, I think, is what it's about democracy, it's about the public, but those are the two things that Republicans these days tend not to like that much.
Here at Spiked, we're pretty sceptical about the hype over artificial intelligence. I mean, it's probably not going to take your job, and it's definitely not going to take over the world. But that doesn't mean AI won't change how we use the internet. Big tech companies like Microsoft and Google are already investing in AI for their search engines. The aim of this is to give them even more control over the search results we can see. What this means is that big tech's monopoly over the internet is about to get even worse. And when a small handful of companies can decide what information you can find online, how can you know what's true or not? That's why I use ExpressVPN. I use it to add a layer between me and big tech. The ExpressVPN app hides my IP address on all my devices, which makes it way more difficult for big tech to identify who I am and to match my activity back to me. Plus, it's so easy to use. Take it from me, I've been using ExpressVPN for years. All I have to do is tap a button on my phone or computer to turn it on. But ExpressVPN doesn't just keep me hidden from big tech. It also encrypts 100% of my online traffic, protecting me from hackers and other prying eyes. The best part is that one ExpressVPN subscription covers up to 5 devices at the same time, so my friends and family can use my subscription to protect their privacy too. So, stop letting big tech leech off your data. Use our link, expressvpn.com/spiked right now, and you can get an extra 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/spiked to get protected with the VPN that's rated number 1 by CNET, TechRadar, and most importantly, by me. That's expressvpn.com/spiked. So Bud Light, one of America's most popular beer brands, has taken an absolute hammering in terms of sales. The impetus for this was a certain Dylan Mulvaney, friend of the show, trans TikTok influencer, was essentially given a kind of sponsorship deal, had all these personalised Bud Light beer brands, Bud Light beer cans made up with his face and all that stuff. And the American drinker is not happy about this, I think it's fair to say.
Now, I was surprised by this. So the Bud Light boycott, which got underway at the beginning of last month in response to this particular Dylan Mulvaney ad in particular, and also really accelerated, I think, when this clip of their vice president for marketing, whose name escapes me at the moment, was there talking about how she was brought in to sort out the brand's fratty image and to make it more inclusive and so on. So I think it's very quickly became another kind of front in the battle against sort of woke capitalism, if you like. People felt lectured by this particular...
Definitely. That's such a direct diss on the consumer. You know, you're too fratty, let's get in a new group. We can't stand you, let's appeal to some other more enlightened, you know, more culturally switched on people. It was
so explicit, and that was one of the things that I think got a lot of people behind it. You started to see these kind of anecdotal reports of people went down to their, you know, local bars, whatever journalistic outlet they work at, and people aren't buying as much Bud Light, but then it actually started to become quite real. So I think on last week, on year-on-year sales, they were down 26%, and also the sales of like Miller Lite and Coors Light, the competitors, have miraculously shot up as well. So it's very clear that it's had an impact. Whereas a lot of people said that it was just a kind of conservative tantrum that wasn't really going to go anywhere. And whilst you don't want to turn it into the sort of Boston Tea Party some American right-wingers are trying to do at the moment, it's a very interesting and I think positive agitation against woke capitalism and this insistence that politics has to colonise all areas of life, even when you're just trying to like watch sports and have a drink. And also that it's constantly kind of directed at you to lecture you about your own lifestyle, your own values. And people have just had enough of this. I'm not saying this is the start of some great revolution necessarily, but it's another sign of that enduring irritation, agitation against all that kind of pieties, I guess, that are coming at them from all directions. Definitely.
I think one thing that's really important to make clear is that, you know, a lot of people who are opposed to this boycott or whatever, they will say this is transphobic. There's a trans person marketing Bud Light, and that's why people are angry, because they're bigots and they're hateful and they can't stand it. But really, you know, Dylan Mulvaney represents so much more than that. This is not just a trans person. This is someone who is documenting their life as a girl, not even as a woman, as a girl, who their videos are so insulting to women. I mean, actually, I'm surprised that maybe this says something about who these companies are branded at, but I'm surprised that the Nike advert or Dylan Mulvaney's little Nike promo didn't do more damage, because you could see in that, you know, he was wearing these Nike leggings, kicking up his heels, doing a ridiculous parody of a woman. I think that's the one that insulted a lot more women, certainly. But still, it's what this whole ideology represents, rather than a single person.
Also, Dylan Mulvaney is essentially America's preeminent trans activist.
Yeah.
I mean, that might sound ridiculous, but interviewing Joe Biden at the White House, demanding to know if he's fully on board with sterilising children, essentially being at the centre of the culture war over gender ideology. Dylan Mulvaney is not just a trans person going about his business. I mean, this is someone who has become a very politicised figure. The fact that he's a slightly ridiculous figure is just testament to the slightly ridiculous ideology to which he is pinned, but that's neither here nor there. I think people object to the Dylan Mulvaney Instagram ads in the same way that people objected to when Colin Kaepernick got that Nike endorsement. It wasn't as many people, but people didn't hate that because he's black. I mean, there's all sorts of black people who have Nike endorsements, of course. The reason it irritated people is because he was very associated with Black Lives Matter, which, as we all know, is not a straightforwardly anti-racist campaign. It's an identitarian, the year zero, all sorts of different things which people really object to. So I think the attempt to just bat this away as, they just hate this ad because Dylan Mulvaney is transgender, are just trying to discredit it, basically. This is an irritation, as I say, not just with the politics that Dylan Mulvaney represents, but the intrusion of that in politics into everything. Like, you can't escape it wherever you go, because it's so important that you're brought on board with the programme, and that's what people are pissed off about.
And it even extends beyond the branding. I mean, if you think about some of the battles that Disney is having with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, Disney was making threats around laws that have nothing to do with Disney, around this so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, which would have restricted teaching to trans issues and around trans issues and sexuality education to kids just younger than 8. And yet Disney weighs in, thinks it's its job to tell the public, tell the elected governor what laws he should pass and shouldn't pass. And it's bizarre because nowadays you have so-called progressives lining up alongside big corporates, saying that big corporates should have the right to dictate politics, and elected representatives should go hang.
No, I think that's a really important point, because these kind of woke capitalism skirmishes are not just about who's fronting what advert, as you say. They feel compelled to take political positions nowadays. Now, people like to dismiss that as woke washing, or they're just trying to make... They don't have to do this. They go out of their way to do it. But at the same time, it is very hypocritical. So I think one of the most risible woke big brands of recent years was Ben & Jerry's. A few years ago, they had a go at Priti Patel over migration policy in a long Twitter thread. And yet again, whenever you see one of these things, just hop on Google and type in their name and controversy, and you will see that these people are not white. In their case, they had actually been hauled over the coals for mistreating migrant workers, as it turned out. All of these things always take place. So there's definitely an element of hypocrisy, of course, but at the same time, these companies are not only trying to re-educate the masses, as it were, but they do feel compelled to wield genuine political power on top and to inflict that on elected representatives. So, and why more people aren't irritated by that, I really don't know.
So former Chancellor George Osborne has called for a complete ban on smoking. He was speaking to the Times Health Commission earlier this week. He said that we should ban all cigarettes, but also we should tax orange juice. It was another little tidbit. I mean, this kind of...
It's hard to know where to begin with this, isn't it?
It's really hard to know where to begin with this. It's just so crazy. But in a sense, it's not that unusual as well. People have become so authoritarian when it comes to things like smoking or to unhealthy food that it's, yes, this is slightly more extreme than what is being argued day to day, but...
I know, I was heartened by the backlash that happened. I think I, like many people, was surprised to find that I could dislike George Osborne even more than I currently do. So it did. What are you talking about? Was the kind of ridiculous backlash. Again, him wanting to kind of not only ban cigarettes, it's time to ban cigarettes. Of course, there's going to be a problem with the black market, but you get that when you make anything illegal. There's really ridiculous comments. Wanted to go back and kind of, finish the business of his sugar tax, extending it to orange juice, which is a great scourge affecting our country, of course, at this particular
point. White people are obese.
Point.
Too much orange juice.
Too much orange juice. But at the same time, as you say, it's not as crazy a suggestion in terms of public health circles than people would think. So, like New Zealand, one of Jacinda Ardern's final acts in politics was to pass this law which would effectively phase out tobacco. So I believe it's anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009 will never be able to buy a cigarette. There's also there was a report that the government commissioned last year. It was a Khan review into kind of smoking and all these different things. Suggested, thankfully not implemented, but suggested that we should raise the smoking age by 1 year every year until no one can ever smoke again. These ideas are very much kind of in the offing. There are many places, including New Zealand, as I say, who are wanting to kind of be these trailblazers in effectively tobacco prohibition.
Yeah.
This is really on the table now. So what, as irritated as a lot of people might have been by George Osborne, this could easily be a kind of sign of where a lot of places are going at this point.
And Labour's Wes Streeting has made similar comments, seemingly on the grounds that he just doesn't like smoking. That people who
doesn't
smoke
like the smell of it.
Yeah, people who smoke smell, and therefore it should be banned. No consideration as to what this means for the black market, the amount of additional crime this produces, the amount of violence and corruption, as everyone knows, attends the drug war, would suddenly reach tobacco as well. And we also have this plan introduced by Theresa May to make England smoke free. Now, we don't necessarily know what is going to be implemented in order to reach that, but it's this idea that less than 5% of people will be smokers. There does seem to be sort of no limit to it. Everything is at least pointing towards prohibition anyway.
Yeah.
So as much as, I agree with you, Tom. George Osborne is one of my least favourite politicians. But what he said is not even that out there.
No, it's really not. And I think it's a reminder of the fact that in this whole discussion, the point and the argument that people should be able to do what they like so long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. Really basic liberal John Stuart Mill sort of principles are completely absent. The assumption is, well, if something's bad for people, they shouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
And therefore, as you saw in these George Osborne comments, as you saw in the Wes Streeting comments, they were like, well, of course, it's a logical endpoint. The state has taken it upon itself to suggest that not only that it wants to kind of ward you away from cigarettes and alcohol, that it wants to ward you away from sugary foods, from all kinds of different things. And so it's the next logical step, which is why it's more important than ever to get back to that kind of more principled argument, which is to say that people should be free to make their own decisions, to weigh up what it is that they value more in life, that being healthy and living a few more years is not necessarily more important than a life of a bit more pleasure, as some people would see it. This is kind of anathema to the sort of debate that we've been having currently, but it's important that we bring it back, because otherwise you will just get this slow drift towards prohibition, especially at a time which is really strange, where smoking rates are like 13% of the population.
Yeah.
This is not something which is plaguing us in any meaningful sense as a society, and yet it's still there because of those old puritanical instincts, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it makes it really clear that it was the time to object to this stuff was at the time of the smoking ban. People failed to defend smokers, and now they're going to come for your sugar, your alcohol, your nos.
Out of your cold.
I don't know how many of our viewers are into their laughing gas, but often the health justifications, such as they are very weaselly.
Yeah.
People, they give laughing gas to pregnant women, for God's sake. It's not really that dangerous. Or we're slightly, for some reason, our public health scientists in the UK are not as mad on the question of vaping. But if you look at what's happening in Australia or in the US, there are big crackdowns on vaping, even though it has been proven to help people quit smoking, much healthier alternative. It's often a little bit like Wes Streeting and his opposition to the smell. It's almost an aesthetic thing. It's almost like a cultural aversion to some of these things, rather than a genuinely kind of scientific health-based.
And it's a reminder that all this public health stuff is really about Puritanism.
Yeah.
Really. Effectively, we talked a bit about this on Last Orders, our Nanny State podcast that we do with Chris Nolan from the IEA. But this is really what drives it. They say it's about your health, they say it's about for your own good and so on. It's because there has always been a layer of society who are quite miserable, who prioritise health over almost anything else, want to impose their lifestyles on the lower orders, and are effectively offended by people's different choices. And I think the vaping thing, as you say, is a perfect example. It's effectively the answer to that thought experiment of what if you could invent a cigarette which has none of the health problems. They pretty much did it, and yet they still want to get rid of it, which I think tells you where they're coming from in all this.
Definitely. So I've just finished doing the podcast with Tom. If this is the kind of thing you're into, or if you're into journalism generally, then I have an amazing opportunity to tell you about. Spiked is restarting its internship program. We're offering full-time 6 months paid placements. This is just an incredible opportunity to kickstart your career in journalism and to be a part of our team, essentially. So there's 2 internships on offer. First of all, there's the editorial internship, where you'll be helping us to produce our articles, essays, features, and things like that. And also we're doing an audio-visual internship. So if you're a dab hand of any of the microphones or cameras, some of the stuff you've seen laid out here, then that's the opportunity for you. We're really, really excited to potentially have you on board. To find out more, just go to spiked-online.com/interns. That'll give you all the details on how you need to apply, about the deadline, things like that. It's really easy. Just go to spiked-online.com/interns. Best of luck. Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.